Hey, this is Tom Willis, and this is the Head Smack Podcast.
You are listening to conversations with misfits, mavericks, and trailblazers.
Hey, welcome to the Head Smack Podcast. My name is Paul Pavolny, and I'm excited to have another misfit with me. I have Tom Willis with me, and Thomas believes that we are all born with unlimited potential. As a former classroom teacher, he also believes in the power of lifelong learning. These beliefs have shaped his primary goal in life, helping others uncover their talents so they can reach their potential. Prior to joining Phoenix, which is the company that he's a part of, he had the great honor of serving as CEO of Cornerstone, a consultant with PricewaterhouseCoopers, and an engineer with the Intel Corporation. Along the way, he's been fortunate enough to earn degrees from the University of Michigan and the University of Notre Dame, MBA, and he thanks God every day for his amazing wife and 3 wonderful children. Hey, Tom, how you doing, man?
Awesome, Paul. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, I'm excited about this conversation. When I first connected with you on LinkedIn and saw that you had written a book on a topic that I love, I thought I need to connect with this guy and we need to have a conversation. I love all things culture, and your new book just released last year, right? And I have both the Kindle and the hard copy. And so I just started diving into that. But look forward to learning a little bit more about that. And so thank you for coming on, man.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I appreciate it. It's fun to talk about this subject. Obviously, care enough about it to write the book, The Great Engagement. So really looking forward to our discussion.
So, I read your bio, but I do like to hear a little bit about people's origin stories and kind of where you got started, how it all got started. Tell me a little bit about the origin story of Tom, and you can go as far back as possible or as appropriate to kind of share a little bit about your story and how you came to do what you do now.
Yeah, well, I like to tell people that I'd be a professional athlete if I hadn't broken my leg when I was 2 years old. And, I literally had a body cast from my chest down both legs, and my brothers would push me around in a wheelbarrow.
Oh, wow.
So it's one of my earliest memories, and I'm not sure if I actually remember it or if I just remember it because we talk about it a lot, and I've seen pictures of it. But yeah, I had an awesome childhood. Really amazing parents, 2 older brothers. Grew up in a sort of middle class family in Michigan here, and didn't really want for anything. Although, as I learned later in life, my dad was an entrepreneur, and there were times where we were probably one paycheck away from a different path in life. And so,
yeah,
he's been a huge motivation for me as an entrepreneur throughout my life. One of the stories is he went into the local bank and asked for a loan to start this new business, and he had a new wife, a new child. My oldest brother didn't really have much money, and he needed money to buy a bunch of equipment. And they gave him the loan, and he walked out and he thought, like, how did that just happen? Like, those people are crazy, giving me a loan. And come to find out 40 years later that his aunt had walked into the bank the week before and said, my cousin or my nephew's going to be here next week. Whatever he asks for, you give it to him and I'll back it, but don't tell him.
Wow.
And so it's a great story that, we've all got these invisible supportive forces in our lives that sometimes we learn about and sometimes we don't. But if we can nurture that ability to see the invisible and to see how blessed most of us are, we can just live a much more fulfilling life. And so, fast forward to today, I've got this amazing team, making organization, and we primarily help CEOs create exceptional cultures.
So how, that journey towards talking about culture, what prompted early on? Was that a later in life that you realized the value of culture? Was that something along the way that you just kept seeing and it was a moment that you had this light bulb aha moment about it? Like how did that journey towards seeing that as a key to business success come along?
Yeah, not just a key, but the key, in my opinion. That there's everyone probably familiar with the phrase "culture eats strategy for breakfast," that people attribute to Peter Drucker, but there's other people that said it before him, and so it's been around for a while. We actually like to say that culture eats everything for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Culture's it. Like as
Yeah.
if you're a leader out there, if you're a CEO, the one piece of advice I would give you is focus on your culture, because you can make a huge difference in your performance and the results that you get, just based on focusing on creating a better culture. It doesn't mean you have to be perfect, but wherever you are, push to that next level. Push your culture to that next level of ability and capability and openness, and all the things that people want to work for. Because the reality is, most organizations aren't very good at this. It's the reason that we have this huge challenge with engagement. It's why people are quiet quitting. We had the Great Resignation. The 70% of people, according to Gallup, are just not engaged. They're just checked out, and it's sad, in my opinion. We can do better as leaders.
Yeah, yeah. So, looking at your career, you've got to work at some pretty large companies, big organizations. You're leading a great company now. Were there moments within that experience that highlighted culture to you, that sent you on that journey? Like, what was the trigger that made you come to that realization of how critical culture was?
Yeah, I think a few things. I was lucky enough to be a part of some groups like the Gates Foundation and others, where we got to go visit some other schools across the country. And I remember walking into one school, and within 10 seconds, I could almost taste the culture. And I know
Wow.
it sounds weird to say, but when you get good at it, you literally can walk into a building, and not just a school, but any organization, and you can almost tell what kind of culture it has within the first few seconds. And that usually is a predictor of what kind of results they're getting, how they perform and whatnot. So for me, sort of the invisible nature, the unconscious nature of culture is precisely what makes it so powerful. It's like the iceberg analogy, right? That
Yeah, yeah.
most of what shapes a culture is below the surface of awareness.
Yeah, yeah. And so you started seeing that, when you approach the schools, but where did that awareness of culture? Like most people are in similar situations, they come and go, they walk in and out of businesses, they walk in and out of jobs, they walk in and out of churches, organizations, whatever, and they never have the awareness of culture like you apparently did. So where did that come from?
It's going to sound like a non-answer, Paul, but I don't know precisely is the short answer. I partially because I can't remember yesterday. I have a terrible memory. But partially because I think, well, I'm a pretty, my faith is hugely important to me. And so I spend a lot of time talking with God, or I think I'm talking to God anyway. And a lot of time just trying to listen to sort of
Yeah,
the
yeah,
invisible. And so I think it's probably in one of those moments of just the classroom of silence. There's a great author, actually there's a great author, a fellow Aussie. His name is Matthew Kelly. And he talks about, if we just spent more time in the classroom of silence, we could learn way more about life
yeah,
than
yeah.
reading another book or watching another show or attending another meeting or going to another conference. If we can do the opposite of what the world is telling us to do and just slow down, we could learn way more.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. Yeah, for me, the understanding of culture, obviously I'm not from around here, which is what they tell me no matter where I go. Even when I go to Australia, they tell me I'm not from around there. But for me, that's where the awareness of cultural impact and cultural differences and all of that started, for me, started making me aware of it. With me, I looked like every other American, but there was a very different thing, different part about me, different upbringing, different values, different priorities, different ways of understanding very similar situations. And so for me, that's where culture, for me, I started to be more aware of it. And it wasn't until I got into, the corporate realm that I started seeing the impact of culture and what a difference it makes. And so, that I'm with you on that. I believe culture can really make or break a company, and it's a lot more important than most people even think about. Now, in your book, you started off with a quote from Henry David Trudeau, and you said the mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation. What is called resignation is confirmed desperation. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, I'm going to back up even further and talk about this idea that many people have talked about, frankly, over the centuries. But Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who some of your listeners may recognize that name, she's the one that sort of coined this idea of death and dying and the 5 stages of grief and whatnot that people are familiar with. Brilliant, brilliant woman. She wrote like 35 books in her lifetime. But she made a pretty compelling argument that foundationally and fundamentally, we human beings are really driven by two emotions. They're two emotions below all other emotions, not fear, or sorry, not anger, but fear. That really fear is driving every other sort of emotion on that end of the spectrum. And at the other end of the spectrum is love, or more specifically, agape love. This idea of uh, putting the other first, trying to be of service to others.
Wow,
And
yeah,
any good organization, frankly, does that, right? If you think about it, if they don't put their customers first, if they're not trying to be of service to the other, the customer, then they're going to go to business. And we've seen that happen time and time again when companies get focused internally on themselves and what they want and how much money they want, they start to run into trouble.
yeah,
But organizations that really get that they're in the business of serving their customers flourish for decades. And so, uh, and it happens at a very human level, at a very individual level. And in the book, we talk a lot about fear and love, fear and love. Are we reacting out of fear and sort of self-defense, or are we responding out of love and out of being of service to others? And we actually get into these 12 cultural mindsets that are those things that happen below the level of awareness, things like gossip and drama and avoidance that really eat away at a culture, and
yeah.
then what the antidote is to all of those.
That's so good. That's so good. Now, you also mentioned that it's really a communication problem between departments. It's a relationship issue. Once people know each other as human beings, everything changes. So, share a little bit what you mean by that and how you've seen that impact culture and relationships.
Yeah, for 30 plus years that we've been doing this work, the number one word we've heard from CEOs and school superintendents and executive directors and presidents, leaders, is we have a communication problem. And the problem with the word communication is it means so many different things that it means nothing. And what we've found is that literally, it's not a communication problem. It's almost always a relationship problem. But it's easier to say communication because then we can just sort of uh, dance around it. We don't have to be that
Right.
direct.
And it it doesn't sound so personal. Communication, just this word, but relationships. Wow, that gets a little more serious.
It sounds harder, or for some
Yeah.
people, it's like, what does that have to do with anything? We're here to run a business. We don't have time for relationships. Well, uh, good luck with that. See how that works for you. Unless you're like a prison warden, or you were working on the automotive assembly line 100 years ago, the fear-based approach to leadership is dead. It's dying before our very eyes, right?
Wow.
If you want to be effective, you've got to figure this out. You've got to figure out that people aren't motivated by fear. The best you'll get is commitment. But when you can inspire folks, when you can help people to see the shared purpose of what we're trying to accomplish and get in touch with their own aspirations, like what the person cares about, they'll give you 10 times more than what you need. They'll go above and beyond every single
Right,
time.
right. That's so good. So when now that you've written the book and obviously you've dealt with this and talked about this for a while, when somebody approaches you and they say we have a culture problem, or maybe they don't have a culture problem and you see a culture problem, they call you in for some consulting and they don't see it as a culture problem. Maybe they're trying to solve another problem. What are some of the first things that you look at when examining to see if indeed it is a culture problem?
Well, I might rephrase it slightly, Paul. We don't actually come in and fix organizations. That's one of the challenges of this industry is too many consultants out there are sort of selling their wares like they're going to fix you. And we don't believe in that as a sort of out of the gate philosophically. We think that every organization is perfectly designed to get the results it's getting. And most of the time we come in, the organization's doing quite well, frankly. Like most of the teams we work with are doing great, but they're frustrated because they feel like they've plateaued and they're not sure what to do. They've read the latest book, the hottest topic, but none of those things seem to work. They never make a dent, and they're looking for help to literally take the next level, to break through to a whole new level of effectiveness.
Yeah.
And so that's where we're typically doing our work is we come in with very much a growth mindset that no one's broken, nothing's wrong with you guys. You're doing great. And like all human beings, we can grow and we can get better. And so let's do it together. Let's do it as a team.
And so what are some of the things that you first start talking about with them?
Yeah, great question. Well, we have to start with a very clear look at the current reality, like what is going on, which sounds so simple, right? But most of the time we avoid that stuff. We don't want to talk about the dirty laundry. And so
Yeah.
we're pretty good at unearthing the reality of like what's going on, what's going well, but also what's not going so well, and helping people to have those conversations that they've never had before. You know, Bob and Susie don't really like each other, but they never really said that. And they really explained why. Well, we got to start there. We got to get to like, what's going on? Why, what's the friction between you two as an example? And sometimes just declaring it can be really helpful to people to move beyond it. And then we spend a ton of time focusing on, okay, what do you want? What's the future that you're going for? And do you want to continue to kind of have this tiff between you? Or do you guys want to work on having a breakthrough and becoming much more effective teammates? And almost always people pick that, right? But they just don't know how to do it.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's true. And that goes back down to the relationship thing. So, when you start looking at those, the key ingredients to an unhealthy culture, and then the key ingredients to a healthy culture, what are some of you talked relationships. Are there any other things that you look at to see if a culture is unhealthy?
Yeah, we do a series of, we have our own proprietary surveys that we roll out. It's a pretty intense program, frankly. This is not for the faint of heart, which is why we're able to promise results to CEOs.
Yeah.
If the CEO is 100% serious about this and about taking their team to the next level, then we're not the team for you. If you just want to bring in somebody to train your people or to do leadership training, that's not us. Because that stuff can be intellectually stimulating, but very rarely does it actually do anything. And we don't want to waste our time. So we have a pretty intense, usually about a 5-month engagement with clients. And it starts with a really deep dive into what's going on, which includes our surveys. We have our own Elevate coaching system, which is like a model that helps people get familiar with their own, what we call default success strategies, like what really is motivating us unconsciously. What's really driving us below the surface. A lot of this stuff gets formed very young in our lives, and we just don't realize it. We're not conscious to it. So a good chunk of our work is just helping the individuals on the team become aware of how their unconscious motivations are shaping the unconscious culture that they're working in. And it's really awesome because talk about head SPAC moments when a CEO, we had a CEO once, this is after the first day of the work, he said, I woke up at 3 a.m. and I swore I saw like an image in my room. It was like this experience. And I realized that I was so frustrated that my culture of 100 or 1,000 employees wasn't getting results, wasn't doing what they say they were going to do. We didn't have a culture of integrity where we did what we said we were going to do. And he said, I realized at 3 a.m. that it's because I wasn't doing what I said I would do. I was saying I would do something and then I wouldn't do it because, well, I'm the CEO and I'm busy. People understand. And he said, it was like this huge head SPAC moment of like, oh, geez, I have to be the work. I have to be the example. And he said, within a few months, he said, I started witnessing random acts of accountability, spontaneous acts of accountability everywhere.
Wow. Well, and it does start from the top, because no matter how much you try and influence a culture, I mean, sometimes you can influence from any place in the business. It's, the most influential person, regardless of position, that can sometimes impact a culture. But coming from the top, it's also important. So if you have culture initiatives that you're trying to do to make it a healthier culture, maybe it wasn't healthy, you feel stagnant, you're not moving forward, but leadership is not behind it, or you have values plastered on a wall that people are like, yeah, we don't do any of that. We don't communicate, we don't have integrity, we don't, whatever. And so it's got to come from the top and then be enforced and be celebrated and, be moved down through the ranks, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's the leaders have to be it before
Right.
people are ever going to follow them, right? We know one of Enron's and words, one of their values.
Is integrity.
Yeah, so it shows you that most of that stuff is mostly worthless.
Yeah.
Um, and again, a lot of consultants out there spend all this time helping people shape their vision statements and their mission statements and their purpose statements and their values, and it's like a painful exercise that takes
Right.
an entire day.
Right.
And they distinguish, no, a vision is different than a mission, is different than a purpose. And maybe they're a little bit different, but it doesn't matter. Like
Yeah.
you're spending way too much time on things that don't matter, because at the end of the day, if you're not being it, they are just words on a piece of paper.
Right, right. Well, and any time that I've talked to people about culture, it's usually, if you're going to have a statement, also have an action with it. Like how does this action or this statement or this word, how does it play out in real life? Like how do you play it out in your day-to-day business activity? And so if you're going to have a word like integrity, how does that actually play out in the business? Is it, we will, do whatever that takes to do the right thing always, in every situation. You know, but having these words just plastered on the wall, of these mission statements that really don't have any actions attached to them or behaviors, then it makes it hard to enforce a culture, right?
Yeah, well, and you can't enforce the culture. Not to pick on your language there, Paul, but that's again, it's a relic of a bygone era of like compliance and do what I say. And young people in particular have no interest in that. They think they can just change jobs every 6 months if they want to, and so there's very much a change happening within our society. There, if people don't feel good about the team they work with and they don't feel like they're on a mission, then you're not going to be able to force them to do anything. You might for a little bit just because of the paycheck, but what kind of culture is that?
Yeah, yeah. Well, and you've shared something important there with talking about mission. Is that something that you help a organization define, evaluate, uh, implement? Like how like that's a key part of it. So how do you work with an organization with that? How do you help them understand the value of it?
Yeah, we would help bring it to life, to reinvigorate it, to make it meaningful. To We think of ourselves as sort of the implementation specialist. That most organizations have spent time doing mission, vision, values, all that stuff, but they're not living it, and that's where
Yeah,
we come in. We're the ones that are good at helping people to really unearth it and to really unleash it, so that it exists in the culture. We've got clients that are 10 years into this work, and they're basically taking our work and they're doing it themselves. They don't need us anymore. We've given them all of our materials. They put their logo on it. They take all their new employees through it because they're living the work. They don't
yeah,
need a
yeah.
consultant to come in and tell them what to do.
So, so we've talked about some of the key things of when you go into an organization or when you're evaluating it. It starts from the leadership. It's mission, vision, values that are actually actionable. They're not just words on a wall. You've talked about relationships. You've talked about mission. What are some of the other things that that you look at that maybe even referenced in your book that you start looking at when it comes to a healthy culture in a business?
Yeah, we get into quite a few, in the book, we get into quite a few pragmatic tools that leaders can use. And they're not like rocket science, frankly, but we have very different ways of approaching these things. So, as an example, three of the tools that are most powerful are leadership, management, and coaching. Those are three words everyone's heard before, but three words that people don't really understand. They don't really have a clear definition. And they're like the difference between a hammer, a saw, and a screwdriver. Those are very different tools. If you try to
Right.
cut a 2x4 with a hammer, good luck, right? But yet we do it as leaders. We apply the management tool when that's not what's needed. What's needed is coaching or leadership. So we have a very different way of looking at those tools that always have people sort of having those aha moments of like, oh, I've been doing this for 20 years and now I finally get it. Now I finally get why I keep running into a brick wall, because I'm using the wrong tool for the wrong situation.
So go ahead and elaborate a little bit on that. Let's just kind of pull that thread a little bit, because for some people, they might kind of know the difference between those three, or maybe they know it, or maybe they're like, well, they're kind of the same dog, different haircut, right? And so, how would you define those, and how different they are in application when it comes to culture and a business?
Yeah, great question. So, well, the first one is leadership, because leadership, if you really simplify it, if you think about one of the greatest leaders of the last century, it's Dr. Martin Luther King. He was unbelievably gifted at putting out a future that people were like, yes, I want that future. He called it
Yeah.
a dream, right? That's how much of a future it was. It was a dream about a different future. And it changed the world. It changed our country, certainly. And doesn't mean it was perfect, doesn't mean it was easy, but he put out a future.
Right.
And
Right.
that's leadership. Leadership is all about generating a view of the future that others take on as their future. And so this is important, because if you don't put out that future first, then you've got nothing to manage, you've got nothing to coach. Because if we're not aligned on where we're going, then we're going to fight about sort of the tactics and how to get there. Because you want to go to Los Angeles and I want to go to Nashville. It's like,
Right. Right.
we wonder why these meetings don't go very well. Right. So that's leadership. And we have a chapter on each one of these in the book. So I'm really giving this very short shrift here. So if you really want to dive into these in great detail, there's a lot more in the book about it. So if that's leadership, then along comes management. And management is very sorely misunderstood in our society. It's, if you want to kill the energy in a room, bring up the word accountability, right? And we're just doing it all wrong, frankly. We're just doing it all wrong. So we talk about this idea of supportive accountability and, a lot of different ways of thinking about this subject. But fundamentally, management's pretty simple. It's getting people to make agreements to do things. That's it. You agree to do this. I agree to do this. We agree to do it by this date. It's integrity. It's to integrate, integrity and integrate share the same root, right? You're integrating your word and your action. You are doing what you say you're going to do. And so if you think about that, that means you're not really managing a person. You're managing agreement that you made with a person, right?
Wow.
The bank doesn't particularly care about who Tom is or who Paul is, right? But they have a very clear agreement with us on our mortgages, right? It's
Right.
black and white. You will pay the mortgage. You will pay it every month, or you will lose your house, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's a great example where management really can be quite simple. It's just making an agreement to do something. And most of the time we avoid that. We don't get a clear agreement. We kind of talk in generalities, or we tell people, what to do, and they don't actually agree to do it. And so this is one of the parts that people have a hard time with, is that if you want people on your team to be able to say yes to something you're asking them to do with integrity, they have to be able to say no. And
Wow.
most leaders have a really hard time with that.
Right.
But the reality is people say yes, and then what do? If they can't do it, they don't do it. And the deadline gets missed, and people get frustrated. So they just said no, they just didn't say it to your face.
Wow.
And so as leaders, again, we have to slow down and get really clear about that. And then finally, coaching. Coaching is, in simple terms, is everything else. It's whatever helps us to move towards that future that helps to support those agreements we made. So leadership first, management agreements, and then we coach the person, we help ourselves move towards that future. And one of the keys to coaching is that coaching is only coaching if it's asked for. This is absolutely critical. So many organizations are killing the power of coaching because they're making it mandatory, or they're making it punitive, or they're making it remedial, or they're bringing in a coach to fix one of their employees. That stuff never works effectively. It damages relationships, and it's a waste of time and money.
Wow. Yeah, and I would assume that kind of coaching is also temporary, because once that hammer is gone, once that authority is gone, it just goes back into bad habits and bad cultural behavior, right?
Yeah, and sometimes like doubly reinforced, because it's like
Yeah.
that person has no idea what they're talking about. They don't have no idea how hard my job is. they're delusional. They're a consultant. They don't get it. It's like the person can like double down on their behavior.
Yeah. Now, part of, I'm sure with the consulting or helping people is, spotting patterns or spotting habits. What are some other negative habits or patterns that you spot or look for that are bad culture or unhealthy culture?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of them. Is the short answer. We highlight 12 in the book, the what we call the 12 cultural mindsets, and I mentioned a couple of them before. I'll just pick one as an example. In many organizations, you have really good people, right? They really want to do what's right. They want to help others. They're service oriented. The idea of servant leadership animates them. And we've worked with engineering firms, we worked with schools, we work with healthcare. It doesn't matter. Human beings fundamentally most want to do a good job. They mostly want to be helpful to others. And we tend to be pretty avoidant. When things get a little dicey or a little tricky, or, we have a relationship issue, we tend to avoid it. And because I don't want to go there. I know they're busy. I don't want to be mean. I don't want to micromanage. I don't want to do this. I don't want to hurt their feelings. And so we avoid stuff. But then what do? We go gossip about them. We go talk about them. We go create drama. We go assume nefarious intent. All of these pretty ugly underbelly things happen. And it's not because people do it on purpose. It's like what we gravitate to as human beings is it feels good to like go talk about somebody. Which then creates another issue and another issue. So you can see how these things sort of spiral, and we call it the vicious cycle, where they all sort of viciously reinforce each other, and all of a sudden your culture is spiraling in the wrong direction. And so avoidance is one example of many.
Yeah, I love that. And so, if we were to play pretend for a minute and say, okay, you are walking into a job, and maybe you've had these jobs, maybe you haven't, maybe we can just have a make-believe one, but you're walking into a job. What would a typical day look like for you walking into maybe an unhealthy culture?
Like literally, what do we do?
Yeah, what would that experience look like? So if somebody's trying to say, well, I don't know whether I have an unhealthy culture, or I don't know whether I have a healthy one. I want to, I want you as the expert to walk into a situation and describe what you would experience if you were walking into an unhealthy culture. And then we'll do the same kind of thing for walking into a healthy culture. What would your day look like if you were, as an employee, were walking into a situation where it was unhealthy? What would that look like? What were some of the signs that you would personally experience?
Oh, if you're an employee walking into a culture where it's not so hot, because I try to get away from sort of binary, like healthy or unhealthy. The reality is every single organization, even the very best ones, do some things that aren't terribly healthy. And even the most unhealthy cultures, quote unquote, do some things that are pretty healthy.
Yeah.
So it's not either or, it's really a mixture of all of that. And it's like, where are we? If we're trying to climb the mountain of life, it's more like, where are we? Are we at 2,000 feet or are we at 5,000 feet? And that organization that's really good is at 10,000 feet. So how do we get up there? How do we pursue better? And not because we're broken at 2,000 feet. It's just we got more growth to do. We got more learning to do. And so that's the first thing is sort of in our mind, we try to frame it as this isn't good or bad. It just is. And do you want to climb the next part of the mountain? And do you need some help? Because we can be your Sherpas in that regard. Now, if I'm an employee and I'm walking in, there's 1,000 signs. If I don't like my job, I don't want to go on Mondays. That's a pretty good one. If I am afraid of talking to my boss about something, if I feel that sort of sickness in my gut, if I see people constantly bickering about each other, if I see my boss saying, well, I don't want to do it, but the central office does, that's cowardice. So there's lots of challenges that can sort of show up as a part of a culture that's maybe not so hot.
Yeah. And, one of the things that I like to say too is that culture is cultivated. And so the culture that you have is the culture that you've allowed to grow. and I see it kind of, as a garden, because, you can have weeds that grow up, you can have fruit that grows up, and, what you've allowed and what you've cultivated is what your culture has become. And so looking at what those weeds are and looking at what those healthy things are that make positive growth is pretty important for a business to understand and look at. And I do encourage you to get the book, because it is a lot more. There's a lot more stuff in there than we can cover even in just one conversation, because culture is such a key part of your business going to the next level and where it needs to go. And so, if as we wrap this up, what's one part of culture, or what's one part of your book, and even the title of your book? Talk about that for a little bit. Where did that title come from? The Great Engagement.
Yeah, well, I don't know if people can see it, but it actually says The Great Resignation, with resignation crossed out, and then it says engagement. And then the subtitle is How CEOs Create Exceptional Cultures. So that's really what the book is all about. And by the way, we were quite tickled when Ken Blanchard, who's sold 30 million books around the world, sort of the guru of leadership in many ways, endorsed our book. He said, he's got a whole long paragraph in it, but he really talked about how, this book will help you become a better leader. If you're serious about creating a better culture, this is a great book for you to read, because it's really about servant leadership in action. So yeah, the title came from really that idea that, coming out of COVID, there's a lot of people just frustrated with their jobs and quitting and switching jobs and resigning, or worse, they quit, but they stay, they're checked out mentally, but they still stay there. And so we were trying to figure out, how do we know, how do we help? Because we know what we have works. I mean, we've been doing it for 30 plus years. 95% of our work is referrals from one CEO to another. How do we help? And so all of a sudden, it was actually Brad, my co-author, that came up with this idea of, what's the antidote to resignation? It's engagement. When people feel engaged in a purpose, when they feel engaged in something that matters, they're going to be animated. They're going to want to be there. And the resignation starts to dissipate. The desire to quit or leave starts to disappear. And it's true for us, all of us, on a daily basis, frankly. There's days where I know I have to fly to California, or I have to fly to Boston, or I'm flying to Nashville, and I do not want to. I do not want to get on an airplane. I want to stay home with my wife and my 3 kids. And in those moments, I have to choose. Am I going to sort of be driven by fear, and I don't want to, and resignation? Or am I going to slow down and think about, whoa, what a gift. I'm flying down to Nashville to help folks who are literally helping decrease the suicide rate in their community.
Wow.
That's pretty awesome. And,
Yeah.
and what an honor it is to help an organization like that. And boom, all of a sudden I'm engaged again. It's like, okay, let's go. Let's get on the plane. Let's go help them. So this happens for all of us as human beings. We have to nurture this mindset, sometimes every day, sometimes once a week, and to keep ourselves engaged, keep ourselves focused. And there's a great tool in the book called the Engaged Life Inventory. It's really simple, but it's a really great, simple tool that takes you 10 minutes, 5 minutes maybe, to complete. And it will give you a sense for literally how engaged of a life are you living. And it can be a life changer if you slow down and really digest it.
So, you mentioned COVID. We're on the other side of it. It seems that, it was just 5 years ago, and in there's a couple of missing years for me, at least. That it's like, I can't believe it was 5 years ago that we started the spring break that never ended. And, what happened to a couple of those years, I've missed it. But we had this time of when people were working from home. And, Zooms before COVID were kind of a weird thing. We didn't do them that often. And when we did it, we tried to pretend that we're in some sort of a formal setting. And then COVID, we're all there in our PJs and casual. And it's like, I'm not even pretending anymore. But it created this situation where people suddenly were working from home. And then after people started returning, semi back to normal, some people still stayed at home. Some people still, went back into the office. How does remote working or not working in the same building or the same space affect culture? And how do you have a healthy culture when you don't have people that actually even meet face to face?
Yeah, great question, Paul. It is a lot harder, frankly, but it's very doable too. It's like putting a man on the moon, right? It's very hard, but it's doable. And as leaders, it just requires us to be that much more intentional, that much more conscious about the what am I nurturing. My wife's a great example. She has a fintech startup called Pocket Nest, and her team is literally around the world. She's got a programmer in the Ukraine, right? Talk about a crazy time to have an
Yeah.
employee in a contractor in the Ukraine when there's a war going on, and but she's done a phenomenal job of building a great culture within that team of people that really want to help each other and support each other, and a lot of it's because of her energy and her ability to kind of create that positive energy and momentum for folks. And she's also very candid with people, very real with them. So there's not a short answer to that, but the short answer is don't blame the virtual world if your culture is not good. It makes it harder. I don't want to misstep or misspeak that. It definitely makes it harder. There's no doubt about it. But it's not because of the virtual world that your culture is struggling. It's likely because you're not leading effectively.
Oh, wow. And so, what are some things that you could do to lead a remote culture?
I don't know where to start. It gets back to the foundation, some of the foundational elements here, right? Like it's what is not the mission statement, but what mission are we on? What is the purpose? Why are we doing this? And you have to remind yourself and your team pretty much every single day. There's a great quip from Zig Ziglar. He talked about how people complain that the effects of leadership and inspiration don't last for very long, right? Like the motivation doesn't last for very long. He says, well, neither do the effects of taking a shower. We recommend it daily. And so
Yeah.
as leaders, we have to lead every single day. We have to remind ourselves and our team members why we're doing what we're doing pretty much every single day. That's probably I got 50 other tips, but that's probably the biggest.
And so, what's the best way to get those tips from you? From the book? Do you have any other way for people to get a hold of you, to communicate with you, to kind of join your world?
Absolutely. Yeah. Pretty active on LinkedIn. Thomas Willis at Phoenix Performance Partners. We have an awesome newsletter that one of our business partners puts together called the Culture Eats Everything newsletter. If you go to our website, you can sign up for that. It's free. PhoenixPerform.com. Phoenix like the city, perform.com. And then obviously the book, pick up The Great Engagement. It's on Amazon. It's on Audible. It's on pretty much any platform you can find. That's always a great place to start. And if you're out there as a leader, you're a CEO maybe, and you're thinking about how can I improve my culture, whether it's working with us or somebody else, take some time at the back of our book and read through that section about results. Because if you're going to hire somebody to help you, make sure that they're going to help you produce results.
Right.
Because too many consultants out there will take you through their leadership development program and they get paid whether it works or not. And
Yeah.
that's not the kind of partner you want.
Right.
Slow down and find somebody that's actually going to produce results and put their butt on the line for producing results.
Yeah. And so, as we wrap this up, what's a head smack or a question that you wish I'd asked you about?
Covered a lot, Paul. You've done a great job asking lots of good questions. I think now it's 2025. There's a lot going on. It's a challenging time, especially if you're in the world of DC, right? And the world's not slowing down. It just seems like every year it's like a little more crazy, a little more something's going on. And so I think probably the one thing that's been really helpful for me in the last couple of years in particular is this idea of radical acceptance. That, radical acceptance isn't just accepting something as it is, like, oh, it is what it is. It's radically accepting it, like you chose it, like it's supposed to happen. So as an example, right before we were about to release our book, literally after 20 years of helping thousands of authors, we were one day away from getting the final copy of our book approved, the cover and everything. The company went bankrupt.
Oh, wow.
With thousands of our dollars, right?
Oh, wow.
And so we didn't have a book. We lost money. And I was like, But within a few hours, frankly, I was able to coach myself down and say, okay, I don't know why, but this is supposed to happen. And then sure enough, like the next 6 months, all these amazing things happened that wouldn't have happened otherwise. It's not
Wow.
easy. This is super
Wow.
hard. Totally not easy. But if you think about it, in fact, Harvard has studied this with leaders. They've found that the best CEOs are the ones that can radically accept something. It's not resignation. It's not giving up. It's just accept it, because that's the foundation, the starting point for improving it, for doing something about it.
Yeah.
So that's a thought, I guess, for everyone to consider, is like, instead of complaining about things or getting frustrated or letting your energies get wasted, like just slow down and say, okay, I don't know why, but why is this happening? And just ask yourself, maybe there's a reason, maybe there's an upside.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and that goes back to even biblical principles of all things work together for the good. Not all things are good. The Bible doesn't say all things are good. Some things really suck. But if we trust the process and trust God that all things work together for the good, and there's always going to be something at the end that we know that in the middle of it we didn't like it, but maybe at the end we can understand it a little better when it all comes down to it.
Yeah, well, since you brought up one of my favorite subjects, I'll just follow you there. There's a great quote, again, from your friend, your fellow Aussie, Matthew Kelly. He says, God is more committed to your happiness and flourishing than anybody. But getting what you want doesn't make you happy. You know that, and God never forgets it. What is good for you is better than what you want.
Wow. That's a great way to end this. I love that. Absolutely love that. Well, man, Tom, this has been amazing. You've definitely shared some head smack moments that I think people, if they look at their organization, if they look at how they're doing things, it'll definitely make them think about it a little more. And I encourage you to read the book. We only scratched the surface when it came to this discussion because it's such a huge and critical topic. I think for any size organization, even if you're just a startup, is making some decisions on what kind of a business you're going to be and what kind of a culture you're going to build. And so I do encourage you to grab the book. Like I said, I've got the Kindle, I've got the hardback. I'm looking forward to diving into both to read that and then probably share some more things, and maybe we'll even do a follow-up once I've had a chance to read through it and chat again. Thank you so much, Tom. This has been amazing.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. It's been a lot of fun. Appreciate it.
You are listening to Conversations with Misfits, Mavericks, and Trailblazers.